Union uniform to fight in the Civil War. So in Charleston, South Carolina, it was 13 black women who came up with an idea to memorialize those African men that were killed. But the abolitionists from the North came down to the South, as they always do, and intervened. And the next thing you know, we would have a day addressing all veterans. Not only did those abolitionists change the course of what was to take place in observing those of us who fought during that war, they also placed that particular day of honor to those Africans on May the 1st, 1865. Now, what is significant about the date of May the 1st, 1865, or May the 1st itself, anything that takes place on May the 1st, that is not good whatsoever, because May the 1st is the Illuminati's birthday. And if you look at the history of this world, and there are many events that took place on May the 1st, which I cannot get into, but there are many, and I want you to look into it. Don't believe a word I say. But the majority of the events, 99% of those events, it was bad. It was satanic. So look into the date of May the 1st and see exactly what I'm talking about. But I like to thank those African women's spirits for what they did concerning those Union soldiers. Now I will go into the presentation on Juneteenth. This picture that you see is actually some of our ancestors that were down in Texas. So we're going to get into the particulars of who these people were, what exactly transpired to what we now today call Juneteenth. I call it freedom or illusion. Lincoln. I must first get into Abraham Lincoln. When I was working on my master's in history at Virginia State University, I decided to do research for my thesis on a man by the name of Hannibal Hamlin. Hannibal Hamlin was from Bangor, Maine, and he was the first vice president under Abraham Lincoln. Many people are not aware of who this man was, but I'm going to show you the connection between Hannibal Hamlin, Abraham Lincoln, and the great so-called Emancipation Proclamation. All right, first of all, we have to get to this particular event right here, and I have to tie it all together, and you'll see how this has anything to do with what we call Juneteenth. In 1816, these men that you see on the screen, these men were responsible for creating an organization that was nefarious in nature. And this organization was called the American Colonization Society, ACS. And as you can see, the first one is a minister, Reverend Robert Finley. And then you have Charles Fenton Mercer, Henry Clay, and I'm sorry, that should be C-L-A-Y, not R. Daniel Webster, Bushrod Washington, Elias Caldwell, Francis Scott Key, and the last one was President James Madison. But there are a few of these men that we need to devote some attention to, and I'm going to right now. Henry Clay was a bigot, a racist, one of the worst racists in American history. And he was friends with Abraham Lincoln. That's why his name is here. And we're going to get a little bit more into Henry Clay's relationship with Abraham Lincoln momentarily. Daniel Webster is the one who's responsible for that dictionary. And in that dictionary is where they would change certain words that we use today, such as Jew, the definition of the word black. Those words would change as time would go on in the Webster Dictionary. Bushrod Washington. This was the nephew of George Washington. Bushrod Washington was a very wicked man, just like his uncle was. So they did not go down in the annals of history as doing anything good, especially for an African people. And of course, Francis Scott Key is the one who wrote the so-called Star Spangled Banner. And his son would actually be killed in Washington, D.C. by a man by the name of Daniel Sickles. And Daniel Sickles also had another connection with history, because he was the general who had his leg blown off. And they actually had this man's leg in the Smithsonian Institute. He would visit his leg every year. President James Madison served as the third president of this organization. And this organization existed until 1964, What were they trying to do? Let's get a little bit into that, as well as that Emancipation Proclamation. So, as you can see, General Order number 11. Before we get into General Order number 11, I'm going to tie some of these things together. Henry Clay, who was friends again with Abraham Lincoln, was responsible for changing the ideology of Lincoln. Now, Lincoln was already bigoted. He had a disdain for African people. Many people are not aware of that, but he did. He had a disdain for African people. We're going to tie this together a little bit more as we continue with this presentation. So let's move forward. The Civil War has started. So in April of 1861, shots was fired that started this war. But as you can see, in 1862, May the 19th, 1862, to be more specific, there was a General Order 11. Now, there are actually two General Orders 11. So be very careful. Both of them pertain to us. The first one is the one that I don't have here, which is the one where the Jews were involved in actually stealing cotton, and they were making a profit off of it. And General Grant actually put out a first General Order 11, and that General Order was to remove all the Jews in certain states. And of course, Lincoln annulled this. He did not allow it to happen. Understand that the Jews have never been friends to African people, ever. So May the 19th, 1862, as you can see here, it would be General David Hunter who came up with this General Order. Now, first of all, let me explain the General Order. A general order is just like an executive order that comes from a president or comes from Congress. It's a law that has very valid standard. And what he actually did is he liberated our ancestors in 3 states: South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And as you can see, I have that highlighted right here in the brown. But if you look a little bit further, this is the response that came from then President Abraham Lincoln. And I'm just going to read the part that you see in red. And further, that neither General Hunter nor any other commander or person has been expressly or implicitly authorized by the government of the United States to make proclamations declaring slaves of any state free. This is President Abraham Lincoln. Now, these 3 particular states have another connection with us. And that other connection they have is Special Field Order number 15, better known as the 40 acres and a mule. We did receive the 40 acres and a mule. It was annulled. It was taken away. But there are some of our ancestors, kin, that are still living to this very day, and I actually know one who still have their 40 acres and a mule. So for those who have said to you that we never received our 40 acres and a mule, we did to some degree, but in entirety as a people, we did not. And this is the remaining part of Lincoln's response to what General David Hunter actually did. So the Emancipation Proclamation, this ties in back to the man I mentioned just a few moments ago by the name of Hannibal Hamlin. Hannibal Hamlin is the one that was behind the scenes in the shadows, pushing Lincoln to emancipate us. Lincoln had, again, a disdain for us. As a matter of fact, he used the N-word on a regular basis. He would call us nigger to any and everyone that wanted to hear it. And he also caused us the Negro problem. And he wanted the Negro problem to be eliminated completely from this country. So, as we all have been taught, on January 1st of 1865, Abraham Lincoln would actually pen what we call the Emancipation Proclamation, which actually started writing this in September of 1860. I'm sorry, this is another typo. That would be 1863, not 1865. So that's January 1st, 1863, not 1865. So it was actually September of 1862 that he started penning this, and he would talk back and forth with his vice president of Hannibal Hamlin. But what is strange is, let me stop here for a minute. What's strange is this: there's a moment in history that they took complete out of the history books. They do not want you to know what I'm about to tell you. But don't believe me, go look it up. On December the 31st, 1862, one day, just one day before the Emancipation Proclamation was read in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, that Abraham Lincoln read, he signed an executive order. And this was with a man by the name of Bernard Koch, Kock. Bernard Koch was like the governor, or you might say an overseer, on the island of Haiti, which is also known as Cow Island, at a place called Elviche or Elvauche. L is Ilevache. And what that executive order was signed to do is have 5,000 of our ancestors shipped to Haiti. And once they was to be shipped to Haiti, Bernard Koch would receive $50 for each one. So that currency that you just saw was an actual currency that was made by Bernard Koch. It was money. So what happened is the majority of our people, and of that 5,000, they died from disease because they could not acclimate to the weather and the harsh conditions. So what Lincoln did is he had the remaining of those that were living brought back to the United States, and they wiped that completely out of the history book. Look into that. Don't believe a word I say. So the picture that you see before you, this is General Stan Wadey. Now, General Stan Wadey was a Cherokee. And of course, this picture right here doesn't show you his true color because he looked exactly like us. So indigenous people who they call Indians, and those are not Indians, though you can call them Arawak, you can call them El Kibalon, you can even call them African, but they certainly were not Indians. So that narrative that we have that Christopher Columbus was looking for a new route to India, that's incorrect. He knew exactly where he was going. Columbus had been trading our ancestors as African slaves into African enslavement. 1482. That's the year they don't tell you about. 1482. 10 years prior to Columbus' first voyage to this hemisphere, he was a slave runner, and they don't want to tell you anything about that. So let's come back to Stan Wadey. So Stan Wadey was one of those among the Cherokee who was involved in our enslavement. As a matter of fact, the majority of the major figures of the Cherokee nations were responsible for our ancestors that were enslaved among the Cherokees themselves. So when the Emancipation was proclamation, of course, they freed them. So they were known as the Cherokee freedmen. So there were freedmen among us from white America, and there were freedmen among the Cherokee nation as well. Don't believe me? Look it up for yourself. So this is the actual document right here that needs to be read to you about something that I found out. I stumbled onto this. There were a lot of general orders during the Civil War that pertained to African people. Some were very important and some were not. But this is one of those that was very important. As you can see, this was in Galveston, Texas, June 19th, which we know today as Juneteenth, 1865. General Order number 3. I'm going to read the entire proclamation and explain it. The people of Texas are informed that the people of Texas, that is the white population, in accordance with the proclamation from the executive of the United States, that would be President Abraham Lincoln, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. The connection heretofore existing between them become that between employer and hired labor. The freemen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at any military post and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. Translation. As a historian, I tell our people this all the time. None of the presidents have ever been any good for us. None of them. Not a one. And this is Abraham Lincoln, who they called the great emancipator. And this is one of his generals. So when we talk about taking down the Confederate statues and the Confederate flag, I agree with you 100%. But when are we going to start talking about the Union? So this was a Union general. So let me translate, especially this red part. The freedmen, that's former enslaved Africans, are advised, been ordered to remain quietly, be obedient at their present homes, enslaved condition homes, dwellings, sleeping in the mud particularly, and working for wages. But you didn't pay them for 246 years, and now you're going to give them a proper compensation. They're informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts. Translation: if you do leave your property, we're not going to give you provisions to live, and will not be supported in idleness. In other words, if you're trying to take a break and try to get compensations, reparations, we're not going to do that. This is showing you the disdain that the Union had for our enslaved brothers and sisters during the Great Ma'afa, and this disaster in America was coming from the Union and the Confederacy. We need to stop with the Confederacy thing unless we're going to talk about the Union thing as well. Both were bad. Both were bad. So, June 19th, 1865, 2,000 Union soldiers went down into Texas. 250,000 Africans enslaved down in the South were just in Texas alone. That's 250,000 people. And it was Galveston, Texas, where this was issued, General Order Number 11. And the general's name was Gordon Granger. But this goes to show you that the Union was no different. Now, I'm going to tell you an incident that took place right here in Petersburg, Virginia. I tell our people this all the time. Petersburg, Virginia has more of our history than any city in America. This little city, Petersburg, Virginia. One of those incidents that took place in Petersburg that many people are not aware of is about a sergeant by the name of William Johnson during the Civil War. So he went AWOL, absent without leave. And they captured him, brought him back. And what the Unions did, they sent out a representative with a white flag between the Union and the Confederacy here in Petersburg. Basically, what they told them was, we're going to have a trial and we're going to hang this nigga because he went AWOL. But not only did he go AWOL, he had inappropriate relations with a white woman. And they hung him right between the Confederate and Union lines in Petersburg, Virginia. And there's a picture of him. Look him up. Sergeant William Johnson. Look the picture up. And you see black soldiers sitting in the background. They would always want to humiliate us in front of our people. So look that picture up. That was the Union. Again, we're not talking about the Confederacy. We're talking about the Union. So the Union and the Confederacy, they were both equally wicked in what they did. All this ties in with Juneteenth. So we have to continue on with this Juneteenth. There were actually 3 13th Amendments. Let me say that again. There were 3 13th Amendments. And most of us don't read. It's not that we can't read. We don't read. So we just follow the narrative of whomever is talking. Some look like us. Some don't look like us. So let's get into all 3 of these 13th Amendments because the second one and the third one pertain directly to us. But I'm going to give you all 3. The first one is called the title of nobility. And this was for white men. Now, as you notice, I have the word knighted there. This is what was taking place and still takes place to this day. So what white men of America were doing, they were actually going to European nations such as France and Germany that had a monarchy, a king or a queen. And they would take a knee and they would be knighted. The problem that America had, the founding fathers, where if we got into a conflict, a war, or some type of scrimmage with that nation, who would they show allegiance to? France, Germany, or America? So they came up with this first 13th Amendment, and it stated that anyone who was knighted lost their citizenship. And so many white men stopped being knighted But strangely, that 13th Amendment just went into obscurity. It just disappeared altogether. It just disappeared. So a second 13th Amendment popped up. The second one is called, I call it the Perpetual Amendment. And this one was actually signed by President James Buchanan. Now, President James Buchanan has a very strange history. He's the first president and only president that wasn't married. He was the first president and only president we know that was openly gay. Not only was he openly gay, he was having a relationship with the former vice president in the administration before him. Don't believe me? Look it up. And they were in the White House together. Everyone knows this that study history. So who was his first lady? It was his niece. But James Buchanan had this disdain for African people. So he would sign off on the second 13th Amendment. And as you can see, it was approved. And I'm going to show it to you in just a moment. And Lincoln, upon becoming president of the United States, he verbally agreed with it. Let me say that again. President Lincoln verbally agreed to it. So the last 13th Amendment is the one that we know, the one that freed us. So we think. But again, we don't read. We just listen to people as they speak. Again, don't believe nothing I say. Look it up for yourself. But the third 13th Amendment is the one that says involuntary servitude or slavery shall be abolished except for a crime or punishment. We are more in mass in prison than in population when you look at the figures based on the 13th Amendment. And the man who pushed for the 13th Amendment, his name was Thaddeus Stevens. And the only reason I believe that he actually did that is because he was having an affair with a black woman by the name of Lydia Smith. This is very well known. As a matter of fact, in the Lincoln movie, at the end of the movie, you pay attention, you'll see a scene where Thaddeus Stevens is getting in bed with her. They know all about this. We're just not studying and we're not listening to the historian. And until we start listening to the historians, we're not going to know any of this information. So here's the title of nobility, which I'm going to read to you. And take note. May the 1st, 1810. May the 1st, 1865. Them white abolitionists from the North came down and switched over that Memorial Day and made it all encompassing with white and black. May the 1st is a bad day for anything in history. This is the second one. Go look at all the dates of May the 1st. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you one more and then I'm going to get back to this. The Lusitania left New York Harbor on May the 1st, 1915. It was sunk. 4 days later, I think it was. Don't believe me? Look it up. May the 1st is not a good date for anything. If any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, or shall without the consent of Congress accept and retain any present, pension, office, or emolument of any kind whatever, from any emperor, king, prince, or foreign power, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them or either of them. This is a photo of James Buchanan, executive order to keep our ancestors and us enslaved forever. They're just not going to tell you about it. There it is. I'm going to leave it there for a second so a few of you can look at it. And then go look this up. As you can see, it was approved April the 2nd, 1861. Civil War hadn't even started yet. It would start 1 month later. But this is President James Buchanan who signed this. There's the 13th Amendment. And as you can see, which I already told you, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. And two states, Colorado Colorado and Wyoming actually had two of the 13th Amendments in their state constitution. Which two did they have? They had this one right here, and they had the one for, I'm sorry, I'm having a moment. They had this one right here, which was the enslavement, and the one for being knighted. So if you look into those, I want to say there were a lot of part of the 1860s. That would be like 1868, 1865 in those two states. And I'm at the conclusion. As we approach the 150th year of the deception or illusion of freedom, many of us continue to accept the revisionist narrative of the Civil War. The Emancipation Proclamation, the third 13th Amendment as liberation of a suffering people. African people of the diaspora have been systematically seasoned and equate ourselves with a fictional condition of citizenship. Lincoln, more than any other president, has given us a false utopia. The other solution to the mental genocide is the historians elucidating the unedited version of our history during these times. Let's first free our minds, and true freedom will not be too far along our path. And I'd like to thank everyone that's in attendance. If there are any questions, please submit those questions at this time.
Professor, did you want them in the chat or you want them to just raise their hand and I'll call on them?
You can place them in the chat. That's fine.
We'll just give you a couple more seconds. I don't see any questions in the chat.
Okay.
Last call. Okay, there aren't any questions, unfortunately. All right. Well, you see our website up there and Professor Bobby's information and email. Did you have anything that you wanted to add before we closed out?
No, I would like to thank everyone that was in attendance, and I look forward to seeing you again on doing the next presentation. And we'll let you know soon what the next presentation will be on. So I'd like to thank everyone that was in in attendance, and hopefully you have a great weekend. And I say hotel.